Hello there. I wanted to make a comment on the Dan Wootton situation that has been bubbling around the UK for the last 2 weeks. I am extremely alarmed at the lack of coverage given how extensive the allegations against Dan Wootton are. For those who don't know, Dan Wootton is a tabloid hack. He was born in New Zealand, is now based in the UK, has written for a number of publications, including The Sun, where he was an executive editor, as well as the editor of Bazaar, the pop column. He is currently a columnist for Mail Online and a weeknightly presenter on GB News. He is the type of hack who has given British press a terrible name. Dan Wootton is the journalist who, if you are famous and if you're having a bad day, then he is about to make it that much worse. He does not care how vulnerable those people are. So over the last 2 weeks, an independent publication called Byline Times has done a series of reports on Dan Wootton following an extensive 3-year investigation. A great deal of people have contributed to this. They have a lot of sources, and the allegations are scary. Absolutely scary and deranged. They include allegations of coercion, covert filming and blackmail. Very serious and extensive allegations. So for the last 2 weeks, since these articles have appeared on Byline Times, Dan Wootton has been trending on Twitter, and not just a little bit trending, but some days 50, 60, 70 and up to 100,000 tweets have been said about Dan Wootton. And yet, shockingly, there has been complete, almost mainstream media blackout of the Dan Wootton coverage. A media silence. Now, campaign group Hacked Off, who I don't have a great deal of time for, but they have got their figures correct. And they also have questioned the media blackout concerning Dan Wootton. And since these allegations have come to light, and what they noted was that in the 24 hours following the Hugh Edwards revelation, and bear in mind, he wasn't even named in the Sun article, but in the first 24 hours, there were 24 articles in the national press about Hugh Edwards. In contrast, in the first 24 hours following the first revelations of the Dan Wootton allegations, just one article appeared in the mainstream press about Dan Wootton. Then there was, so in total, there's been like one article on BBC website, The Guardian, Yahoo and Private Eye, who revealed that News UK, owners of The Sun, have offered 24-hour counselling support to members of staff who believe they were targeted by Dan Wootton. But the reality is most of the British press has refused to touch the story. Now, we know in part that Dan Wootton's very expensive lawyers, Mishcon de Rea, had sent out a threatening letter to the British press. So that in itself is really problematic, right? Because you've got to be able to have a free press, including commenting on allegations regarding journalists. The silence is absolutely deafening. Let us not forget that Dan Wootton himself went after Philip Schofield with a deep, burning passion, interviewing Eamon Holmes, splashing it everywhere, insisting he be suspended and investigated. None of these things have happened with Dan Wootton, right? The articles are still continuing to come out, each one more deranged than the previous one. If you haven't read them, I implore you to read them. They're shocking, absolutely shocking. And what is even more shocking is, well, Dan Wootton has done a sort of generalized statement of I've done nothing criminal. He hasn't taken these allegations and denied them. One of the allegations is that Dan Wootton has been operating under a series of aliases for years in which to coerce and blackmail people. These aliases are claimed to be called Martin Brannan and Maria Joseph. Again, Dan Wootton has not denied that he is any of these aliases. Let me tell you something. If, as a journalist, somebody came out and said, Sonia Poulton has been operating under this alias and she is responsible for this very serious criminal activity, you wouldn't be able to stop me denying it, right? Because that's the point about innocence, is you cannot help yourself but to plead it when you are innocent. What Dan Wootton has done instead is set up a crowdfunder with very questionable wording. And as somebody who has been embroiled in lawsuits for the last 3 years, I've become quite au fait with legal writing. And that the wording on that crowdfunding sounded like he was doing a dance with words while not actually saying anything. And so that was really, really questionable. But the thing is, Dan Wootton has set himself up as a man of the people, which is hilarious given his history. The reason that he's able to say this is during lockdown, he was one of the few journalists who actually spoke out against it, which is great. But a stop clock, as we know, is right twice a day, right? And that's not enough reason to support somebody, regardless, when they are subject to such serious allegations. Let me be clear here. There are often miscarriages of justice. People get accused inaccurately of things they haven't done. And this could be the case here. But the point is that he's not being appropriately investigated. What we do appear to know is that his twice weekly column on the Daily Mail has not appeared for weeks. There is rumours that he had a meeting with the Daily Mail, and since that, the column hasn't appeared. However, he still appears nightly on GB News, and they've doubled down. The other presenters are supporting him and rallying around and saying, this is a targeted attack. This is the establishment against us. That's ridiculous. You're not going to get much more media that is establishment supported than GB News, the ruling party of the government. There's so many of them who work there and who go through there. And it is essentially a government supporting channel. That is the reality. So to set themselves up as anti-establishment is absolutely hilarious, especially when I, as a journalist who actually is anti-establishment, and I don't always think that's a great thing either, but I am naturally. But Dan Wootton is as much of an establishment hack as you're likely to get. There is absolutely no doubt that he props up the royal family. And how much more establishment is that? His obsession with people is alarming. Ever since I've been looking into him, I've noticed over the last few weeks that he runs a nightly poll on Meghan and Harry. Now, don't get me wrong, I can't stand that pair. I think that they are dangerous in terms of internet censorship, and they are globalists. There's no doubt about it. However, to focus on them every night is really disturbing, and it shows something slightly odd about his character. And I suggest it gives us an insight into potentially what might be going on in the background with him. So let me just be clear here, just for the sake of clean hands. I have appeared on Dan Wootton's shows previously when he was on Talk Radio. This was really before I had looked into him properly. And I just thought, well, you know, it's really useful to be able to use it because there were about two good causes why I appeared. And one of them was to do with Prince Charles at the time claiming to have COVID and then going off to Scotland. And I was able to go on Talk Radio and sort of talk about the nonsense of it all. So it's very useful. I used that large platform to be able to say that. However, when he went to GB News, and then I actually started to receive information, including texts alleging that he was this character called Martin Brannan, including texts alleging that he had seriously assaulted people. And then I started to look into him more. And what I discovered really disturbed me. And so then when his producers and researchers approached me to be on his show, I turned them down. I have absolutely refused to be on any GB News show, including Dan Wootton's, because I don't believe for a second that it is a channel for the people. I do believe it is the most obvious controlled opposition that currently exists. But you may disagree with me, and that's fine because we're allowed to disagree, right? But what we shouldn't be disagreeing on, if we agree that when there are serious, extensive allegations surrounding a person, that person should be subject to an investigation. If I had serious, extensive allegations surrounding me, which was evidenced in a newspaper, I would expect to be investigated. Anybody should, but somehow Dan Wootton just keeps moving on, which is incredible. And the silence is odd because it's clearly that this is an actual news story. It's not distraction. This is an actual news story, because if there is any truth to these allegations, that means while Dan Wootton has been sitting as judge, jury, and executioner over people's lives, he has been potentially carrying out very serious illegalities in the background. I went to the Metropolitan Police to find out what they were doing about it. And while they couldn't confirm him by name, because that is the way law goes, they were able to confirm to me that they were looking into allegations regarding a report, and this was being considered for investigation. So he is not yet under investigation. You know, as I say, the silence is odd because it is clearly a news story, and you only have to look at what happened to other famous TV presenters who were accused of bad behaviour, e.g. Hugh Edwards, Philip Schofield, and this week, James Martin. The press have gone in on James Martin, and fine, they can do that, right? That's entirely up to them. But let's get some balance here. Not one of those three names that I've just mentioned have been accused of the heinous crimes that Dan Wootton has. So what is the difference, right? What is the difference? He's not an anti-hero. He's not anti-establishment. None of these things could be further from the truth. And in fact, I would go so far as to say this, and that is, do you want to know when someone is a protected asset? And that is, they are subject to multiple allegations, multiple trending on Twitter, and yet somehow their employers and the people who rally around them are saying, oh no, this is trying to bring down the station. Stop trying to distract. Focus on the reality. The reality is it's one person who's being accused, not the station. I don't doubt there are a whole bunch of leftists trying to cancel GB News, 100%, absolutely, but that's not what's going on here, not at all. So rather than address these allegations directly, Dan Wootton has gone on a mission of obfuscation. So he did this sort of piece to camera where it's like, we're under attack, the establishment are after us. As I say, that's absolutely ridiculous. You're not going to get more of an establishment hack than Dan Wootton. He set up a crowdfunder in which he's pitched it left versus right. Again, these are such serious, extensive allegations. It has nothing to do with party politics, and anybody who tries to make it a party political issue is somebody that we should be watching, right? You know, the fact is these allegations cross all political persuasions, and the extraordinary level of silence tells me that so many people are compromised. And the question is why? Why are people compromised? Well, what you have, first of all, is you have this group of people who had never necessarily done TV before, but Dan Wootton brought them on his show, so they feel beholden to him. So they've come out in support of him. These are what I call the kind of COVID truthers. They emerged during COVID. And a lot of them are really, they're not people in search of truth at all. They were just on the sharp end of C19 and their businesses were impacted. And so they started to speak out. But for the most part, they're not really interested in other forms of truth. Then you have people who are already on his show and are worried about losing their place, right? Then you have people who have a grudge to bear against Byline Times. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. The people who are supporting him for apparently all the wrong reasons. And none of them are prepared to actually look, it would appear, at these allegations and say, okay, right, I'm not going to make any judgment at this moment in time. The jury is out. But the fact is, these allegations need to be looked into. And that's not happening, right? It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. Andrew Neil, right? Andrew Neil, the hack who wanted people ostracized from society if they weren't prepared to take an experimental jab, and who founded GB News, has been keen to distance himself from Dan Wootton, right? And he was like tweeting, why should I have anything to say? I don't know anything about him. Well, that's funny, Andrew. Dan Wootton was an original GB News member. And when Andrew Neil was still there, look how cozy they look in this picture, right? And so these are the realities. Then you have like another hack, Toby Young, again, somebody I don't have time for. And he's out there asking people to donate money to Dan Wootton's crowdfunder and against Byline Times. You're the Free Speech Union. You're trying to shut down a free press. We should be very, very careful here, because what's going on is playing very neatly into the hands of the online harms bill, spearheaded by people who are trying to convince you they're anti-establishment. This is concerning. And as a journalist, I am deeply concerned by their actions, deeply concerned. The fact is, Dan Wootton has always been, and almost certainly will always be, nothing more than a professional gossip who doesn't like it when he finds himself at the centre of speculation. So why the reluctance to cover this? Well, we know Wootton's lawyers have threatened newspapers, okay? But that doesn't explain the silence. Could it be that people all over British media have been caught in the stings that Wootton is alleged to have carried out for a decade? Is that possible? Are they silent because they're scared about being exposed? Because the fact is, the Byline Times articles are extensive, including evidence of Wootton paying people from the Sun money. So these are things that we really need to look at. What's interesting is Caroline Dinenage from the Media Culture Committee. She sent a letter this week from the House of Commons to the Sun about the scandal and asking about how this is being investigated. We know that the Sun has brought in lawyers to look at this. This could well push a Leveson too. This really could. And which troubles me, because again, that could likely play into the online harms bill, which is really all about censoring free voices. We have enough censorship. We do not have a free press. That is a lie, right? That is absolutely a lie. And when you have people like Dan Wootton, who are seemingly getting away scot-free without even being questioned for such extensive allegations, you have to wonder why, especially when they're turning it on its head and saying that he's being attacked by the establishment. Lies, all lies. Right. I just want to say this, right? And I don't have a dog in the race. I'm an investigative journalist. Dan Wootton is a professional gossip. I am not in competition with him in any way, shape or form, but I do believe in fairness and balance. And that is, if we are going to look at the actions of other TV presenters, which we must, then he should not be exempt from that. What makes him exempt? Is it because he is cherished by the establishment? Because you only have to look at his output to see that the support that he gives to the royal family and maintaining the status quo for them is above and beyond. It's almost like he's employed by them, which I'm not suggesting he is. I'm just saying he's like a good employee. I just want to say this because I think it's really important to say this, right? First of all, the hate that Dan Wootton has been receiving online is directly in proportion to the hate that that man has put out into the world. Karma is like that. I am not accusing Dan Wootton of anything. I don't know the truth. I am just saying that there are so many allegations we cannot afford to keep ignoring it, because by continually ignoring it, something smells really off. So as far as I'm concerned, there's a clear course of action that should take place right now. And that is GB News should suspend Dan Wootton. He should be subject to the type of investigation that a Dan Wootton would demand of other people. And on that note, I wish you a good day. Watch out for the traps.